This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. Get a whole month free at Mubi.com/Karsten. Hey everyone, welcome back to another What I Watched This Month February edition. Started this month with Rustin. I think this might be the most Oscar baity movie of this award season. And in that way, it's also the most unremarkable. Nothing is offensively bad about Rustin, it's just insanely bland. I finished this around 9 p.m. and by the time I went to bed, I couldn't remember if I had actually watched a movie that night. All that said though, Coleman Domingo is obviously great. Then I watched The Creator. I went into this with pretty low expectations based on what I was hearing, but I ended up enjoying it. I mostly fell in love with the look of this film. The VFX are inviting and incredibly well executed, even if parts of this remind me of like r/wallpaper and the kind of stuff that I would geek out over in like high school. I still think it looked amazing. The story, on the other hand, is definitely not anything special. It's actually so bland that it feels like it gets in the way of the world building, where usually it's the other way around with these things. But I liked this. I think it's good that we have a big, ambitious, original sci-fi film like this, even if it isn't perfect. I doubt it, but I hope this gets a sequel of some sort so they can build off of this one and just improve on all the things that didn't go right here. Then I watched Nimona. Listen, I am thrilled for all the young people who will discover this and be really into it and have it emotionally connect to what they're going through, but this one is not for me. I do love the animation. It feels like big animated films these days either have to follow the Spider-Verse style to get any sort of respect or follow a traditional 3D style, and this one has a style that's entirely its own thing. And I thought the story was heartwarming, of course. Riz Ahmed specifically delivers a really great voice performance. But yeah, I found a lot of the humor to fall flat. I found the characters to be kind of annoying, and the story just didn't do a ton that surprised me or had me leaning forward. I just was kind of passively watching this. It was just a good and fine film, but again, I'm certainly not the kind of person they made this for. Then I watched Bobi Wine, The People's President. This is an Oscar-nominated doc about Bobi Wine, a politician and musician from Uganda who uses his platform to try and run for president and put an end to Uganda's current dictator. Firstly, I knew close to nothing about this situation in Uganda before watching this, and the film certainly does a good job showing just how broken the political system is over there. It's a really frustrating film that lets the viewer in on what a political campaign under this sort of system looks like, as well as how a revolution comes to be. I think it's really interesting in that regard. In that way, I found it both eye-opening and infuriating to watch, even if the filmmaking itself is painfully straightforward and safe. Then I watched Flamin' Hot. I only watched this because it was nominated for an Oscar somehow, and yeah, I did not like this movie. While the technical elements are fine, the film itself is really corny, retelling this rags to riches story that apparently isn't even entirely true, but I only learned about that after watching it, so that doesn't really change my opinion on the film itself. The film is not offensively horrible, but it doesn't feel real or earnest. It feels like one long parody, or like you asked an AI to study the last 20 years of film and shit out a movie. And to me, that's the kind of stuff that, even if it's competently made, is just a waste of time in my book. Then I watched The Tale of the Fox. This was for my Monkey Mondays challenge. It's literally a stop-motion animated film about a fox that acts like a dick, so you can see why it might be something I would enjoy. But past that, I thought the animation, for being from the 1930s, was so innovative and ahead of its time. So many cool choices with motion and backgrounds that really sells the whimsical charm of the film. And the monkey in this is incredible. He's speaking French, he looks happy to be there. It's just one of those movies that'll make you smile, where you get to forget about everything for 90 minutes. It's free on YouTube. Then I watched Lady Snowblood. Tarantino was so inspired by this for Kill Bill that you might as well call Kill Bill a remake. And how can you blame him? This is one of the best movies I've ever seen. It's probably up there as one of my favorite revenge films of all time. I mean this as a compliment. For being just a little over 90 minutes, I feel like I'm watching an epic. The lighting and use of color in this thing is unbelievable. These images burn themselves into your eyeballs. It's some of the best blood I've ever seen on screen. Striking is really the best way to describe this in both its look and narrative. I mean, really, as far as revenge films go, none have expressed it as visceral as this does. The feeling of being brought into the world to seek revenge, just to end up on the other side of the blade. Oh, it's so sick. It's one of those perfect movies that I will watch many more times in my life. Then I watched The Eternal Memory. This is a raw look into the lives of an old couple and how they cope when one of them is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. For personal reasons, movies about Alzheimer's are always a tough watch and a tough sell. It's hard to tell this story in a unique way, in a way that isn't going to be just devastating to sit through. And The Eternal Memory captures a naturalistic point of view to this disease that isn't entirely miserable, and I think there's a lot of benefit to that. There's so much love in this documentary, so much sacrifice, and it's much more a tribute to this marriage than it is an overwhelmingly depressing film about this disease. Its minimal approach may test your patience. I personally do wish it went a bit further, but I'm glad this one is up for Best Documentary. Then I watched The Color Purple. My thoughts on this have been a roller coaster. I started out thinking it looked really cheap and thrown together for a major studio musical. Then I got pretty invested for a good chunk of the middle, cried at the end, and then 2 hours later forgot that I had watched this. The thing is, with musicals, I tend to have at least one musical number stuck in my head for hours after I finish one. But gun to my head, I could not recall a single musical number from this movie, which is a huge problem. You have some of the best voices working today and some of the weakest tunes. And when you have these musical numbers take up a large chunk of the runtime, they become kind of a pain to get through, especially once you start feeling really invested in the story and they just get in the way. The acting here is incredible. I'm thrilled to see Danielle Brooks was nominated and totally think Fantasia Barrino was snubbed. It's so well performed. It has all the pieces to be great. It's just a damn shame that the rest of it isn't as good. Everyone deserves better. And I watched Four Daughters. This is an Oscar-nominated doc about a Tunisian woman and her daughters, two of whom were radicalized by Islamic extremists, and what happens when she brings in two actors to play those daughters and reenact moments of their upbringing. If you can't tell by that premise, it's a fascinating film. It's a very unique film that explores trauma, reflection, religion, performance, and obviously mother-daughter relationships, which feels like a lot, but you'd be surprised at how well the film balances all of this and how it does so in a really nuanced way. It's such a real movie. Nothing is black and white here, just like real life. And while they make the case that this doesn't solve anything, reflecting and understanding what happened from a clearer lens is what helps them move forward. Personally, it's my favorite doc of the year. And I watched Nine and Waipo. This is my personal pick for Best Documentary Short this year. It's a lovely tribute to these two women and celebrates being alive in a brief, hilarious, and heartfelt way. And I watched 20 Days in Mariupol. This is a very heavy documentary about the 20 days in Mariupol when Russia began their invasion, and I have mixed feelings on this one. It's undeniable that what Chernov does here with his filmmaking is bold and powerful. The images in this documentary will stay with you for a long time. When you expect it to pull back, it just leans in. It doesn't cut away when it gets uncomfortable, and I think that choice is what makes it such a special documentary. Truly, the thing that gets in the way for me is his choice of narrating most of the film, which I think takes away from the images on screen at times, even though it feels like it's trying to dramatize it and make it feel even sadder than it already is. I think it ends up doing the opposite. It seems to work against what the philosophy of the film is, which is putting you there as closely as possible. There's something about dramatizing these events and trying to make such horrific atrocities cinematic through narration that takes away something from the film for me. But as far as the documentary goes, this is one of the most powerful examples of what the medium has to offer, and if it wins the award, I will not be upset at all. Then I watched American Symphony. This is a documentary about Jean-Baptiste writing a song for his wife as she undergoes intense chemo, and I was surprisingly really into this. For one, why is this one of the most beautifully shot films nominated for an Oscar this year? I'm assuming they shot it on film. The grainy cinematography looks just stunning in pretty much every scene. And Jean-Baptiste, call him an industry plant all you want, is a really entertaining documentary subject, and clearly like one of the most musically talented guys out there. He has such a unique place in the industry, and getting to see a behind-the-scenes look into one of the most tumultuous periods of time I've ever seen a person go through was fascinating. And his struggle to balance his overwhelming success in the industry while coping with his wife's intense chemotherapy was very well told, and in the end, pretty heartfelt. It feels a little unfocused for a lot of it, and I can't say it's lasted with me much since seeing it, but in the moment, I thought it was a very compelling and beautifully presented doc. Then I watched Perfect Days. This movie is extremely my thing. I love films that embrace how mundane everyday life is, and this film is exactly that. It seems like a simple thing to pull off, but that's where the magic lies in films like this, because I ended up entranced by this. I got lost in the film and could have watched this for hours, and that just speaks to how well edited, acted, and composed this film was. There's a tiny moment where his sister shows up in the film that leads to him crumbling down, which really affected me because it tapped into that feeling of focusing so much on yourself, building up such a fortress that you forget there are people out there who love and care about you. And for some reason that just really hit. In that way, I found this to be a devastating movie that doesn't romanticize his way of living or turn the working class lifestyle into an aesthetic, as I've seen some people criticize this for. No, I don't think it does that at all. It simply shines light on the beauty of routine as well as the cons. Then I watched The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Caught this one in 35mm with a post Q&A with none other than Roger Deakins, which was such a cool experience. I'm still wrapping my head around seeing one of the greatest cinematographers ever in person. It was such a great time. I thought the film itself was fucking crazy too. Maybe this was the case at one point and I just wasn't paying attention, but I feel like this should be talked about in the same breath as other modern westerns like No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood, films that take the classic genre and darken it and look closer at the characters. I love what this decides to do with Robert Ford's character. It's a wonderfully told tragedy in that the ending does feel devastatingly tragic, no room for argument there, and just for being that committed to the tragedy, I gotta give this film props. Rare to see something this unabashedly nihilistic. Also one of Deacon's most gorgeously shot films. The train robbery scene alone is a goddamn masterpiece in lighting. Andrew Dominique, I'm so sorry I ever doubted you after Blonde. I wasn't familiar with your game. Then I watched The Doctor and The Monkey. I'll come clean, I realized at 11:50 p.m. on Monday that I never watched a monkey movie that day, so I found the shortest film possible, which happened to be this. I have close to no thoughts on this other than classic monkey nonsense right here. Then I watched Madam Web. That 1 minute long monkey short was way better than this entire movie. I talked about this enough already. One of the worst things I've ever seen. I can't wait to watch it again. And I watched Purple Rain. As a proud Minnesotan, it's kind of absurd I've never seen this before, but I enjoyed it. This take won't surprise anyone, but I thought every scene where Prince was performing, or that had Prince music behind it, was incredible. The When Doves Cry scene was weirdly amazing. It shouldn't have worked as well as it did, but it did. And everything that wasn't Prince was pretty dumb. But for the film to still land on its feet as a pretty decent time is impressive, considering how much of it doesn't work. What I said about that one scene can actually be applied to the film as a whole. It shouldn't work, but it does. Then I watched To Kill a Tiger. I've seen some criticisms toward this film as it focuses primarily on the man in the story rather than the victim. But that criticism misses the entire point here. I think the point of the film isn't to focus on the horrific event that the victim went through, but rather how people responded to it, specifically the men in the village. And I think watching one man fight his way through this case was very moving and at times heartbreaking. It brings a lot of insight into the topic and says a lot about how we move forward and make change, even in small ways. Then I watched the live-action short film nominees. I thought The After was unbelievably bad, one of the most baffling Oscar-nominated films I've ever seen. Lame premise, surface-level exploration of grief, and an over-the-top performance that does not work at all for a short like this. Red, White, and Blue is one of the most unique movies I've seen about abortion, playing with the viewer's expectations for a good chunk of the film just to leave you floored by the end. Night of Fortune is a quiet and bleak look at grief and masculinity, told with some stunning cinematography and dark humor. Invincible is another powerful look at masculinity through the lens of a 14-year-old boy in the last 48 hours of his life. It's raw and tender in a way where you can tell the filmmaker put their entire heart into this. Out of all the shorts, this one touched me the most, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, even if it's a little bloated. And The Wonderful Life of Henry Sugar is my personal pick. I've talked about this many times before. I think this is Wes working at the top of his game. Then I watched the animated short film nominees. Our Uniform has some of the coolest animation I've ever seen in my life. I just wish there was a bit more to the short itself. Letter to a Pig also had one of the coolest art styles I've ever seen, with a bit more bite. It lost me a bit in the back half, but I found it beautiful to look at. Pachyderm, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, was interesting, but I'm not entirely sure I understand what happened in this film, or I didn't feel much of it. Its abstract nature prevented me from ever feeling completely invested, but again, great art style. 95 Senses is my personal favorite of the bunch, even though it probably has the tamest animation next to these others. The story here is such a heartbreaker, and Tim Blake Nelson's voice acting is so wonderful to listen to. And War is Over, a short inspired by the music of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, is probably my least favorite. Despite loving the song it's based on, the short itself is really unremarkable next to these others, and too simple. It's a good and fine short, but it doesn't really push the boundaries in its animation, storytelling, or political messaging. In other words, it's definitely winning the Oscar. Then I watched The Planet of the Apes, the original 1968 version, and I thought it was simply incredible. I mean, talk about one of the best sci-fi films of all time. Fine, I will talk about it. I feel like so often I see a sci-fi and I'm like, damn, I wish they explored that concept more. And Planet of the Apes is for people like me who want to get down to the nitty-gritty of the science of it all, how this society works, what their beliefs are. Which is why I'd imagine people going into this wanting action scenes would be extremely disappointed. There's a good chunk of this where it's just like monkeys and humans talking in a room. But in my opinion, that's way more fascinating. Leave it to a damn Monkey Mondays movie to be be one of the best examinations of man and our inherent narcissism towards how we see ourselves in the universe. Not to mention the makeup, which looks so great you forget what you're watching after a while. I found the ending to be unsettling in all the right ways. Really, this had the same effect that James Cameron's Avatar had on me, where days later, all I wanted to do was go back to this world, which is how you know it did something special. I just really, really liked this movie, and I'm so eager to watch the other films in the series. And I rewatched Dune, I kind of rewatched Dune. I got knee surgery at the end of this month, and I threw on Dune while I was still somewhat foggy from the drugs they put me under. So I slept through damn near most of this film, which I'd imagine is one of the ways Denis wanted you to watch this, but I still enjoyed what I saw. And I watched Little Murders, watched this one mostly for Elliot Gould, and ended up getting a very strange and surreal movie about marriage and life and violence. The humor in this film is so bizarre, and I see it more as a collection of weird, sometimes incredible moments that could add up to be a masterpiece, but instead feel more like pieces, which I can still get down with. Like I said, the scenes themselves are always a wild ride, but I could never fully latch on to this film's very bizarre wavelength. Then I watched All About Eve. The thing about this film is it's such an iconic story. It's been referenced so much that sometimes I didn't even realize it, which is to say it's easy to look at the original source and feel underwhelmed or unsurprised by it all. But no, that's not what happened. I still found it to be one of the most unique and sophisticated screenplays of its time. Everyone talks about how amazing the screenplay is, which it is, but to me the performances truly sell this. For a film that can go from hilarious to tragic in a snap, both Bette Davis and Anne Baxter understand the tone and can walk that fine line perfectly. This is one of those classics that fully lives up to the hype. Then I watched Malcolm X. This is another classic film I've been waiting for the right time to dive into, and what better time than when I'm in recovery from knee surgery. Just last month I talked about how Edward Yang's Yi Yi is kind of a film about everything. Not one life, but all of life told through several different people. And Malcolm X, similar in scale, does achieve the feat of capturing one singular life. And that's an achievement I can't really say I've seen before. Watching this film, even though you assume there was more to him, you feel as though you watched an entire person on screen, an entire life. The legacy, the imperfections, the change, it's all on full display, while also capturing the history of the civil rights movement and how America viewed race. Really, when you take a step back, this is Spike Lee's magnum opus, a film that seems to envelop nearly everything he's aimed to talk about in his films under one umbrella. It may not be the cleanest or neatest presentation of it all, but I've never seen Spike Lee as someone who polishes his films like that. I think he's really good at just communicating ideas as loudly and as aggressively as possible, and this is truly one of the most extreme examples of it. It ties its themes back into the present, links them to the past. It tells it all in a way that's timeless and is still deeply relevant today. It's a clear-cut masterpiece that I know has a lot of love, but I still think this should be talked about a bit more as one of the greatest cinematic achievements. Then I watched Io Capitano. I didn't expect much going into this, but I ended up being completely obsessed. Talk about riveting. This and Society of the Snow are both up for Best International Feature this year, and if we're talking films about resilience and survival, this one worked a lot better for me, because at the center of this devastating film, full of highs and lows, is a fully realized protagonist played by Seydou Sarr, who adds so much vulnerability and warmth to the film. You believe everything he's going through, to the point where the film feels like a documentary, and I think that's so amazing. It's a very good movie that had me glued to the screen from start to finish. Then I watched Bringing Up Baby. This is one of the most celebrated screwball comedies of all time, and I wish I liked it more than I did. A lot of great bits. Cary Grant always makes me laugh. Katharine Hepburn, very hit or miss here. Anything involving an animal in this, comedy gold. But this is almost too quick and snappy that it gets, I'll say it, a little exhausting after a while. And you know, I like bits just as much as the next guy, but damn did this test my silly tolerance. And I watched Spa Night. I watched this as research for something I'm working on that I won't expand on. It's about a topic I'm very interested in, and as much as I love the script here, I think the execution falls a little flat. It is a very low budget film, and they managed to do a lot with a little, but man, some music would be nice. I also wish the central performance was a bit more involved. I wished the cinematography was more inspired. I still felt it near the end, but I was mostly underwhelmed by this. And I watched Dune 2, which is a masterpiece. A few days out, I feel like I can say that. Go watch my video on that one. Then I watched like 3 episodes of that new Avatar show before tapping out. I didn't think any of it was offensively bad, but I also realized I had no reason to be watching it. I loved the original animated series, and there was no chance this was going to top that, and so why bother? Plus, it was clear that obviously this show is targeted for a younger audience. My time and energy should just be spent on literally anything else. On that note, I also started Severance, which I love. God, I'm only 3 episodes deep. But how amazing is this show? I'll definitely finish it by next month, so you can look forward to that. But I apologize for sleeping on this as long as I did. I'm hooked. And wow, that's what I watched this month. Jesus Christ, what a lot. Thanks for watching. Go watch all these films and form your own opinions. And if you're looking for something to watch next month, you should check out this week's sponsor, Mubi. Mubi is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. With Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected by its team of curators. Discover the best of cinema at your fingertips, streaming anytime, anywhere. Right now, they have 2 amazing collections that are streaming, one of which is called Calling the Shots, Women Cinematographers, which pretty self-explanatory, a collection that showcases films shot by women, as well as a series called And the Oscar Goes To, a collection of movies that both won and lost awards. It's got a ton of hidden gems that I had no idea were even nominated. I just watched Breaking the Waves, which I will talk about next month. There's so much to love about Mubi, and the best part is that you can try Mubi free for 30 days at Mubi.com/Karsten. That's MUBI.com/Karsten for a whole month of amazing cinema for free.